In a world that often ridicules faith, one man's simple act of prayer unleashed a storm of mockery from the media. But when Keanu Reeves responded to their jeers, no one saw what was coming. Comment where you're watching from today, and let's dive into this remarkable story. The premiere was like any other in Hollywood. Camera flashes illuminating the night, fans screaming from behind velvet ropes, and celebrities dressed in outfits worth more than most people's cars. The red carpet stretched like a crimson river, guiding the stars toward the theater entrance. Among them walked Keanu Reeves, not in the flashiest suit or with the loudest entourage, but with a quiet, contemplative presence that had become his signature over decades in the spotlight. Unlike many of his peers who thrived on attention, Keanu moved with an understated grace. His dark suit was simple yet elegant, his hair slightly disheveled in that way that seemed both accidental and perfect. But what set him apart wasn't his appearance. It was the aura of genuine humility that surrounded him, a quality increasingly rare in an industry built on ego and image. The event was for the premiere of his latest blockbuster, another action-packed thriller that critics were already praising. Fans had lined up for hours just to catch a glimpse of him, but Keanu, as those who knew him would expect, took time to sign autographs and take photos, never rushing, treating each person with the same respect, whether they were industry executives or teenage fans. What happened next wasn't planned for the cameras. It wasn't meant to be a statement or publicity stunt. Between interviews, thinking he was having a private moment, Keanu was caught on camera, briefly closing his eyes, head slightly bowed, lips moving silently in what was clearly a moment of prayer. In the chaotic world of Hollywood, this small island of reverence lasted only seconds, but it was enough for dozens of cameras to capture. By morning, the images had spread across social media like wildfire. In a culture where celebrities are expected to be either overtly religious as part of their brand or completely secular in their public persona, Keanu's genuine, private moment of spirituality seemed to confuse the media machinery. They didn't know what to do with it, so they did what they often do with things they don't understand. They mocked. Keanu prays for box office miracle, read one headline. Matrix star asks God to save his career, claimed another. Morning Talk shows featured panels of entertainment experts analyzing the moment, many suggesting it was a calculated move to appeal to religious audiences or a sign that Reeves was worried about the film's performance. "It's kind of sad, really," said one commentator on a popular morning show. "When stars start getting desperate for relevance, they suddenly find religion. We've seen this playbook before." The audience laughed as the host pantomimed an exaggerated prayer pose. Social media amplified the derision. Memes appeared showing Keanu praying with captions mocking his faith. Late-night comedians incorporated jokes about it into their monologues. Keanu was praying that people would forget about those Matrix sequels. One joked to uproarious laughter. What made the mockery particularly striking was its intensity. In an era where respect for diverse perspectives is supposedly valued, the ridicule directed at this simple act of faith revealed a glaring double standard. Had Keanu been caught in a moment of meditation or practicing yoga, the response might have been admiration for his mindfulness. But prayer, particularly in the Christian tradition many assumed he was following, was apparently fair game for derision. Through it all, Keanu remained silent. No press releases clarifying his religious beliefs were issued. No angry tweets defending himself appeared. His social media accounts, managed by his team and rarely featuring personal content anyway, continued posting only about his professional projects and charitable work. This silence only fueled further speculation and, in some quarters, more intense mockery. "If he really believed in it, wouldn't he defend it?" asked one commentator. "His silence speaks volumes about how serious this actually was." What the critics didn't understand, or chose to ignore, was that Keanu Reeves had never been one to justify himself to the public. Throughout his decades-long career, he had maintained a level of privacy, unusual for someone of his fame. His personal tragedies, the stillbirth of his daughter, the loss of his long-term girlfriend in a car accident, were carried with dignity rather than exploited for public sympathy. His extensive charitable giving was done largely without publicity. His kindness to film crews, fans, and strangers was revealed through other stories, never his own boasting. This was a man who had once been photographed sitting alone on a park bench eating a sandwich, creating what became known as the Sad Keanu meme. Rather than reacting with offense, he had simply noted that it was strange to see himself turned into an internet phenomenon. His calm acceptance of both fame and criticism had become as much his trademark as his roles in films like The Matrix and John Wick. Behind the scenes, those who knew Keanu personally watched the media frenzy with disappointment but not surprise. His longtime friends knew of his complex spiritual journey, a path influenced by his multicultural upbringing, his experiences with loss, and his thoughtful nature. He had never claimed to adhere to a specific religion, but had always been open about seeking meaning beyond the material world. Keanu has always been a seeker, one close friend told a reporter who had reached out for comment. He reads philosophy, explores different traditions. His spirituality is personal and genuine. It's not something he uses for publicity or discusses casually. As the mockery continued into the second week, something unexpected began to happen. Fans started pushing back. On social media, hashtags like #Leave Keanu alone and #Respect Faith began trending. People shared stories of their own experiences with prayer and meditation and how important these practices were in their lives. Others pointed out the double standard at play, how other forms of spiritual expression were treated with respect, while prayer was deemed worthy of ridicule. "If this was any other spiritual practice, would we be mocking it?" wrote one popular cultural commentator. The derision directed at Keanu reveals more about our cultural biases than it does about him. The conversation was shifting, but the man at the center of it all remained silent. Those expecting an angry defense or a tearful explanation on a talk show were left waiting. Keanu continued promoting his film, answering questions about his character and the story, deflecting any attempts to draw him into discussing the controversy. His quiet dignity in the face of mockery only heightened public curiosity about how, or if, he would eventually respond. Then came the moment that would, as the headlines later declared, shock everyone. The morning dawned crisp and clear in Los Angeles. The same sun that illuminated the glamorous red carpet, now casting light on a city already buzzing with the latest celebrity controversy. 3 weeks had passed since Keanu's prayer had been captured on camera, and what had begun as simple mockery had evolved into a full-blown media circus. Television pundits debated the place of religion in Hollywood, social media continued to churn with hot takes, and entertainment magazines featured cover stories asking, "Is Keanu having a spiritual crisis?" Through it all, the man at the center remained an enigma. Keanu had completed his contractual press obligations for the film, and then seemed to vanish, a disappearing act he had perfected over years of maintaining his privacy between projects. Some speculated he was hiding in shame. Others suggested he had retreated to some spiritual retreat to escape the ridicule. In reality, those closest to him knew he was simply living his life as he always had, quietly, thoughtfully, far from the spotlight's glare. On this particular morning, Keanu was spotted at a small cafe in a quiet neighborhood of Los Angeles. He sat alone at an outdoor table, a worn paperback open before him, a cup of coffee cooling at his elbow. His hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, his face partially obscured by sunglasses and the stubble of a beard he'd grown since the premiere. To most passers-by, he was just another Angelino enjoying the morning sunshine. A young waitress approached his table, refilling his coffee with a slightly trembling hand. She had recognized him immediately, not just as Keanu Reeves the actor, but as the man whose private moment of faith had become public spectacle. "I just wanted to say," she began hesitantly, "I thought it was brave, what they caught you doing. My mom always says that prayer is just talking to someone who's always listening, even when no one else is." Keanu looked up, his expression softening. He thanked her quietly, not with the rehearsed gratitude of a celebrity acknowledging a fan, but with the genuine appreciation of one human being connecting with another. The waitress walked away with a story she would tell for years to come, not about meeting a famous actor, but about encountering a man of quiet conviction. What she couldn't have known was that this small interaction represented the first ripple of what would soon become a wave. As Keanu returned to his book, a collection of Eastern philosophy that had been his companion through many film sets and long flights, his phone buzzed with a message from his publicist. A major talk show wanted him as a guest, not to promote his film, which was already performing well at the box office, despite, or perhaps partly because of, the controversy, but specifically to address the prayer incident, as it had come to be called. Keanu's initial instinct was to decline, as he had declined all previous requests for comment. His faith, a complex tapestry woven from Buddhism, Christianity, and his own personal spiritual explorations, had always been private. He had never used it to promote himself or his work. The idea of discussing it now, forced by circumstances rather than by choice, felt wrong. And yet, as he sat in the morning sunlight, watching the world pass by, something shifted in his thinking. Perhaps there was value in speaking up, not to defend himself, but to defend the principle that faith, in all its forms, deserved respect rather than ridicule. Perhaps his reluctant celebrity could serve a purpose beyond entertainment. That afternoon, in a quiet studio office stripped of the usual fanfare of television production, Keanu sat down for what would become one of the most watched interviews of the year. The host, a woman known for her incisive questions and genuine interest in her subjects, began not with the controversy, but with Keanu's childhood. "You've lived a life that spans continents and cultures," she noted. "Born in Beirut, raised in Australia and Canada, career centered in America. How has that shaped your view of the world and your place in it?" It was a thoughtful opening, allowing Keanu to speak about his multicultural upbringing, his exposure to different belief systems, and his lifelong curiosity about the big questions. He spoke with the same thoughtful pauses and careful consideration that characterized all his interviews, but there was an openness, a willingness to engage that surprised those who knew him only as the reticent star who avoided personal questions. "I've been fortunate," he said, "to see that there are many paths to understanding, many ways people make sense of their existence. I've always found value in listening, in learning, in respecting those different approaches." The conversation meandered through his career, his passion for motorcycles, his love of literature. The host, respecting his privacy while gently steering toward the topic everyone was waiting for, finally asked about that moment on the red carpet. "You were caught in what appeared to be a moment of prayer," she said, and the response from some quarters was, "Less than kind. How did that affect you?" There was a pause, one of those famous Keanu pauses that had been parodied by comedians, but that his fans recognized as the mark of someone who actually considered his words before speaking. When he finally answered, his voice was soft but clear. "You know, I've experienced loss in my life. I've faced questions that don't have easy answers. And in those moments, I've found comfort in reaching beyond myself, whether you call that prayer or meditation or just a quiet conversation with the universe. It's never been something I've discussed publicly, not because I'm ashamed of it, but because it's personal, sacred even." He paused again, a small smile touching his lips. "As for the mockery, I've been in this business a long time. I've been praised for things I didn't think deserved praise and criticized for things that seemed unimportant. This felt different, not because it was about me, but because it was about something larger than me, about how we treat each other's deepest beliefs and most vulnerable moments." The host leaned forward, sensing they were approaching the heart of the matter. "And how should we treat them?" "With kindness," Keanu said simply, "with respect, with the understanding that we're all trying to make sense of a complicated existence. That's not just about religion or spirituality. It's about being human." As the interview continued, viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, expecting a dramatic revelation or a passionate defense. What they witnessed instead was something far more powerful. A man speaking with quiet conviction about the importance of mutual respect in a divided world. No fiery condemnation of his critics, no teary-eyed confession of faith, just a thoughtful reflection on dignity and kindness. What no one knew yet was that this was only the beginning. Keanu's response would indeed shock everyone, not for its drama or controversy, but for something far more unexpected in today's world, its genuine wisdom and grace. The interview aired on a Tuesday evening, and by Wednesday morning, it had become the most watched segment in the show's history. Clips spread across social media platforms, not with the mocking tone that had characterized the initial coverage of Keanu's prayer, but with a sense of admiration and reflection. Comment sections filled with viewers sharing their own experiences with faith, spirituality, and the search for meaning. What had begun as a controversy was transforming into a conversation. Major news outlets that had participated in the mockery now featured thoughtful analyses of Keanu's words. In an age of outrage and polarization, wrote one respected columnist, Reeves offers a masterclass in responding to criticism with grace rather than grievance. Another noted, perhaps what shocked viewers most was not what Keanu said, but how he said it, with no hint of defensiveness or self-righteousness, qualities we've come to expect in public figures addressing controversy. But the true impact of Keanu's response was still unfolding. In Los Angeles, at the headquarters of one of the entertainment news programs that had been particularly vicious in mocking his prayer, producers gathered for their morning meeting. The show's ratings had taken a noticeable dip since Keanu's interview aired, with viewers expressing disappointment in the program's earlier coverage. "We need to address this," the executive producer said, reviewing the overnight numbers. "People are connecting with what Reeves said about respect and kindness. Maybe we should consider a different approach, not just to this story, but to how we cover celebrities in general." It was a small shift, but a significant one. In newsrooms and production offices across the industry, similar conversations were happening. The mockery of Keanu's faith had exposed something uncomfortable about entertainment media: its readiness to ridicule certain expressions of spirituality while celebrating others, its hunger for controversy over compassion. Meanwhile, Keanu had returned to his usual routine. He was spotted at his favorite bookstore, browsing philosophy texts. He took his motorcycle for long rides along the Pacific Coast Highway. He had lunch with friends at neighborhood restaurants. Despite the renewed attention, he maintained his characteristic reserve, neither seeking the spotlight nor actively avoiding it. What he couldn't avoid, however, was the effect his words were having. A week after the interview aired, he visited a children's hospital, something he had done regularly for years, always without publicity. But this time, as he moved from room to room, bringing moments of joy to seriously ill children, he noticed something different. Parents and staff approached him not just as a famous actor bringing cheer to sick kids, but as someone whose recent words had meant something to them personally. "My daughter and I watched your interview," one mother told him as he sat by her child's bedside. "She's been going through so much with her treatments, and sometimes it's hard for her to understand why this is happening to her. Your words about finding comfort in prayer, about reaching beyond yourself, they helped her. They helped us both." Keanu listened with the same attentiveness he brought to everything, his eyes reflecting both the woman's pain and her hope. He didn't offer platitudes or easy answers, just his presence and understanding. Before leaving, he placed a hand briefly on the little girl's shoulder and whispered something that made her smile. It wasn't caught on camera or reported in the press, but it was representative of who he was, someone who understood that the most important moments often happen away from the public eye. As he was leaving the hospital, a reporter was waiting. News of his visit had somehow leaked, despite the facility's strict privacy policies. The journalist approached with microphone extended, asking if his hospital visit was part of a spiritual journey or an image rehabilitation after the prayer controversy. For a moment, Keanu stood silent, his expression unreadable behind his sunglasses. Those who knew him might have expected him to simply walk past without comment, as he often did when confronted with intrusive questions. Instead, he paused. "I've been visiting kids here for over 15 years, he said quietly. "Not for cameras, not for image, just because it matters." He gestured towards the hospital building behind him. "What happens in there, the courage of those children, the dedication of their doctors and nurses, the love of their families, that's what's worth talking about, not me." With that, he walked to his motorcycle and rode away, leaving the reporter with a different story than the one they had come for. The clip of this brief exchange went viral almost immediately. What viewers saw wasn't just a celebrity deflecting attention, but a man redirecting it to something more deserving. The contrast between the reporter's question, focused on image and controversy, and Keanu's answer, focused on the real human stories inside the hospital, couldn't have been clearer. This moment, perhaps even more than the formal interview, crystallized what people were beginning to call the Keanu effect, a way of responding to criticism or misunderstanding, not with defensiveness or counterattack, but with quiet dignity and a refocus on what truly matters. Religious leaders of various faiths began citing Keanu's example in sermons and teachings, not because he had proclaimed any particular doctrine, but because he had demonstrated a universal principle: that faith, whatever form it takes, is not about public performance, but about finding meaning and purpose beyond oneself. Educators reported students referencing what Keanu said in discussions about dealing with bullying and social media harassment. Mental health professionals noted the value of his approach as a model for responding to criticism without letting it define or diminish you. What had begun as a mocking headline, Keanu praised for box office miracle, had evolved into something far more significant. Not a story about a celebrity's momentary embarrassment, but a cultural moment of reflection on respect, privacy, and the human search for meaning. And still, Keanu himself maintained his characteristic reserve. No follow-up interviews, no victory laps in the press. Just a man continuing to live according to his principles, unaware, or perhaps simply unconcerned, that he had become, for many, a model of how to navigate public criticism with private grace. But the story wasn't over. The most surprising chapter was yet to come, the moment that would truly shock everyone and transform a fleeting controversy into a lasting legacy. 6 months passed. The controversy that had once dominated entertainment headlines had faded, replaced by newer celebrity scandals and Hollywood dramas. Keanu's film had completed its theatrical run with impressive box office numbers and was now streaming, introducing it to even wider audiences. The media cycle had moved on, as it always does, to fresher stories and more recent outrage. But something had changed, something subtle yet significant. Entertainment journalists noted a slight shift in how faith and spirituality were discussed in their industry. The reflexive mockery that had once greeted public expressions of prayer or religious belief had been tempered, replaced by a more measured consideration. Not universally, of course, cynicism still thrived in many corners of the media landscape, but enough that observers took notice. There's a before and after the Keanu prayer incident, one veteran entertainment reporter remarked in an industry podcast. Before, ridiculing a celebrity's faith was easy clicks, easy laughs. After Keanu responded the way he did, not with anger or defensiveness, but with that thoughtful reflection on respect, it made a lot of us in the industry reconsider our approach. All of this unfolded while Keanu himself had returned to what he did best, working on new projects, maintaining his privacy, and living according to the same principles that had guided him for decades. He had just wrapped filming on his latest project and was taking some time off, riding his motorcycle through the California desert, finding solace in the vast open spaces and star-filled nights. It was during this quiet period that news broke of a massive wildfire raging through a rural community north of Los Angeles. The fire had spread with frightening speed, forcing hasty evacuations and overwhelming local resources. National news covered the disaster with somber updates on homes lost and containment percentages, while social media filled with pleas for assistance and prayers for those affected. 3 days into the crisis, with the fire still only partially contained, a local news crew was interviewing evacuees at a shelter set up in a high school gymnasium. Families sat on cots, surrounded by whatever possessions they had managed to grab before fleeing. Children colored with donated crayons while parents spoke in hushed tones, wondering if their homes still stood. The reporter was speaking with a firefighter who had been working for nearly 48 hours straight when someone off-camera caught her attention. She paused mid-sentence, her eyes widening slightly before she composed herself and continued the interview. But viewers at home noticed the momentary distraction, and soon social media was buzzing with screenshots and speculation. There, in the background of the shot, was Keanu Reeves, not in a publicity-friendly photo op at the front of the shelter, but in the far corner, quietly distributing water bottles and food packages to displaced families. He wore no identifying clothing, no security detail surrounded him, and he seemed to be actively avoiding the camera's gaze. He was simply there, helping because help was needed. As the day progressed, more stories emerged. Evacuees shared on social media that Keanu had been at the shelter for hours, listening to their stories, sitting with frightened children, and even organizing an impromptu reading circle to keep the youngest ones distracted from the crisis. One elderly man posted that Keanu had helped him contact his daughter in another state when his phone had died, waiting patiently as the man, overcome with emotion, struggled to remember her number. Most notably, several shelter volunteers mentioned that when they arrived for their morning shift, they discovered that Keanu had spent the night there, not as a celebrity visitor, but as one of many volunteers who stayed to make sure needs were met through the dark hours when fear and loneliness often hit hardest. By evening, major news networks had picked up the story, not because Keanu or his representatives had alerted them. In fact, his team declined all requests for comment, but because the shelter's inhabitants couldn't stop talking about the quiet kindness of the man who had once been mocked for taking a moment to pray. And then came the revelation that truly shocked everyone. A local fire department chaplain, interviewed about the community's response to the disaster, mentioned that he had been conducting optional prayer services at the shelter for those who found comfort in faith during the crisis. "We had a good group last night," he said. "People from different backgrounds, different beliefs, all coming together. And yes, Keanu Reeves was among them." When pressed for details by the clearly excited reporter, the chaplain shook his head. "I won't share what's said in those circles. That's private. But I will say this. He wasn't there as a celebrity. He was there as a human being, seeking connection, offering support, and yes, praying alongside people who were suffering." The same media outlets that had once mocked Keanu for a brief moment of prayer now found themselves reporting on his participation in a prayer circle for fire victims, not with derision, but with a newfound respect. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. As the story spread, it intersected with memories of the earlier controversy, creating a powerful narrative arc that resonated far beyond celebrity news circles. Historians of media later would point to this as a moment when coverage of faith in the entertainment industry began to change, not dramatically, but perceptibly. The mockery didn't disappear overnight, but it became less automatic, less accepted. Through it all, Keanu maintained his silence on the subject. When he eventually returned to the public eye for his next film premiere, reporters who asked about his time at the wildfire shelter received the same gentle deflection he had always used when questioned about his private life. "There were a lot of people helping," he would say. "The first responders, the shelter staff. They're the ones who deserve attention." This response, redirecting praise to others, maintaining his privacy even amidst positive coverage, only cemented what many had come to understand about Keanu Reeves. His faith, whatever form it took, wasn't something he wore for public approval or discarded when it drew criticism. It was simply part of who he was, as genuine in a wildfire shelter as on a Hollywood red carpet. The lesson that emerged wasn't about any specific religious belief, but about authenticity, kindness, and the dignity of allowing each person their own spiritual journey without mockery or judgment. It was about responding to derision, not with defensiveness, but with such consistent grace that the derision itself is eventually transformed. In a world that often rewards outrage and punishes restraint, Keanu had demonstrated another way forward, one marked not by grand statements or public battles, but by quiet conviction and everyday compassion. And that perhaps was the most shocking revelation of all. Because sometimes, the most powerful response to mockery isn't a counterattack or a passionate defense. Sometimes, it's simply continuing to be exactly who you are, with such unwavering authenticity that the world eventually has no choice but to take notice and perhaps to change.